I can make him hear, Elizabeth whispered, her voice steady but trembling with something between certainty and fear, as if she'd seen this nightmare before. In the courtyard of Larson Dynamics headquarters, glass and steel kissed the afternoon sky, and fountains carved from imported Italian marble sang songs that only some could hear. The air tasted of power and perfection, every surface polished to a mirror shine, every angle calculated for dominance. Alex Larson cut through it all like a blade. Sharp suit, sharper words. Phone pressed to his ear as he negotiated a merger that would make headlines by evening. His voice commanded billions with a single syllable, yet the small figure trailing behind him moved through a world of absolute silence. Lincoln was 10 years old, drowning in a turquoise-striped shirt too bright for the loneliness in his eyes. His green gaze followed his father's moving lips, understanding nothing, feeling everything. Deaf since birth, or so every specialist had proclaimed, he existed in the space between his father's empire and his father's attention, touching neither. That was the moment Elizabeth Ward stepped through the service entrance. She wasn't what they expected. No white coat, no medical jargon, no promises wrapped in false hope and expensive procedures. Just a black woman in a professional magenta blouse, her braided hair catching light like falling stars, her eyes scanning the courtyard with the precision of someone who'd learned to see what others missed. Security briefed her at the door. "Don't expect miracles. Mr. Larson has tried everything." But Elizabeth wasn't looking at Alex Larson's empire. She was looking at the boy by the fountain, small hands pressed against marble, feeling vibrations his ears would never translate into sound. She saw something else, too. The way he winced, just slightly, touching his left ear, as if something beneath the skin whispered secrets only his body could hear. Their eyes met across 20 feet of manicured perfection. Elizabeth didn't call out, didn't wave. She simply raised her hands and signed, "Hello, I see you." Lincoln's entire body went still. Then his eyes widened. Not with surprise, but with recognition. Someone spoke his language. Someone saw him. She signed again, her movements gentle but deliberate. "I see you." For the first time that afternoon, perhaps for the first time in months, Lincoln smiled. Behind them, Alex's phone call continued, oblivious. Mergers and acquisitions, stock prices and market dominance. The soundtrack of a man who could buy anything except the one thing that mattered. But Elizabeth had stopped listening to the billionaire. She was watching Lincoln's hand drift unconsciously to his ear again, that subtle wince crossing his face. Her breath caught. Her fingers unconsciously touched the small locket at her neck. Inside, a photo of another boy with bright eyes and a smile that had been silenced forever. She'd seen this before. 8 years ago, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and death, she'd watched her little brother Jamal press his ear exactly the same way, confused and frightened, while a device that promised miracles slowly killed him instead. Lincoln signed to her, "What's your name?" Elizabeth signed back, "Elizabeth. Tomorrow we'll play again." She didn't add what she was thinking. "Tomorrow I'm going to look inside your ear. And if what I suspect is there, God help whoever put it there." Alex's phone call ended with a triumphant bark of laughter. He turned, prepared to collect his son like another piece of property, another item on his endless checklist. But he stopped. Lincoln was laughing, silently, beautifully, engaged with this stranger in a way Alex hadn't seen in years. The boy's hands moved in fluid conversation, his face alive with an expression that money and medical degrees had failed to purchase. For a moment, something cracked in Alex Larson's perfectly composed face. Relief? Guilt? Hope? Elizabeth met his eyes and nodded respectfully, the acknowledgement of an employee to her employer. But her hand never left the locket at her neck, never stopped touching the memory of a boy who looked so much like Lincoln, it made her chest ache. "I couldn't save you, Jamal," she thought. "But maybe I can save him." Alex Larson didn't know it yet, but the woman he'd hired to care for his son wasn't there by accident. And the miracle she was about to pull from Lincoln's ear would cost him everything he'd built, and give him back everything he'd lost. Before we continue with what Elizabeth discovers next, if this story is already gripping you, if you're wondering what that device really is and how Lincoln's life will change, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is a story about truth, courage, and the cost of silence. You won't want to miss what happens next. Now back to the moment that changes everything. 8 years earlier, Elizabeth Ward had been a different person. She'd been 23, fresh out of nursing school, still believing that medicine was about miracles and that companies with pristine websites and billion-dollar research budgets actually cared about the children they experimented on. She'd been naive enough to sign the consent forms without reading the fine print. The memory hit her now, standing in the gleaming lobby of Larson Dynamics, waiting for the car that would take her to the estate. She closed her eyes and saw Jamal. 7 years old, gap-toothed and beautiful. Deaf since birth, but vibrant in every other way. He'd learned to read lips before he learned to read books. He'd created his own signs when the official ones felt too formal. He'd made their small apartment feel like a symphony, even in silence. When the recruitment email arrived, it felt like providence. A free medical trial, cutting-edge neural technology, the promise of hearing without surgery, without risk, without the price tag that had kept families like theirs locked out of innovation's miracle cures. Revolutionary auditory restoration through bio-integrated neural mapping. The words had glittered like diamonds on the glossy brochure. Elizabeth remembered holding Jamal's hand in the pristine waiting room, walls so white they hurt to look at, magazines no one read, families who looked like hers. Black, brown, poor, desperate. All of them had been promised the same thing. Your child will hear. The first week was heaven. Jamal came home from the clinic with a tiny device implanted behind his ear. Barely visible, they'd said, completely safe. He'd touched it constantly, fascinated by the small bump beneath his skin. The doctors showed charts with upward trajectories, played videos of previous success cases, used words like breakthrough and paradigm shift. Elizabeth remembered the exact moment she'd started to suspect something was wrong. Jamal had been watching cartoons, reading the captions like always, when he suddenly pressed his hand to his ear. Not scratching, not adjusting, pressing, like something inside was trying to escape. Lizzie, he'd signed, his small face contorted with confusion. It feels like a heartbeat, but it's not mine. She'd called the clinic. They'd told her it was normal adjustment, neural integration, sensory calibration. Medical jargon that meant we don't know, but we need you to keep quiet until we figure it out. 2 weeks later, Jamal started screaming. Not the screams of a child throwing a tantrum or scared of the dark. These were different. Primal, agonized, the sounds of someone whose body was being betrayed from the inside. He'd clutch his head, sign frantically that something was moving, growing, burning inside his ear canal. Elizabeth had rushed him to the emergency room 4 times in 3 weeks. Each time, the doctors found nothing on standard scans. Each time, representatives from the trial appeared with clipboards and concerned expressions and paperwork that required signatures before Jamal could be treated. The infection set in during week 6. Bacterial meningitis, they'd called it. A tragic complication. Unforeseeable. These things happen. But Elizabeth had watched the device pulled from her brother's ear during emergency surgery. Black, curved, metallic, with biological tissue wrapped around it like a parasite's cocoon. She'd watched the surgeon's face go pale, watched him photograph it, watched him quietly inform his superiors. She'd never seen that device again. Jamal died 11 days later. 7 years old, body ravaged by infection, brain swollen beyond saving. In his final conscious moments, he'd signed to Elizabeth. The heartbeat stopped, but so did mine. The lawyers arrived before the funeral. They came with condolences that tasted like ash and contracts that smelled like blood money. $50,000. An NDA so ironclad it could have survived a nuclear blast. Threats wrapped in silk. If you speak about this trial, about the device, about your brother's death, we will destroy you. We will sue you into oblivion. We will make sure you never work in medicine again. Elizabeth's mother had wanted to take the money. They couldn't afford the funeral otherwise. They couldn't afford the apartment rent, the unpaid medical bills, the grief that had moved in like a third resident. But Elizabeth had taken the contract, read every word with tears streaming down her face, and made a promise over her brother's closed casket. I will find out what killed you, and I will make sure it never kills anyone else. She'd spent 8 years keeping that promise. 8 years working as a medical aide, taking jobs that gave her access to experimental technology records, learning to spot the patterns, the redacted files, the corporate shell games that turned children into test subjects and called it progress. She'd traced the trial back to its source, a web of shell companies, falsified sponsors, buried lawsuits. The trail had gone cold dozens of times, but she'd kept digging. Until 3 months ago, when she'd found it, a single document, heavily redacted, listing Larson Dynamics as a silent partner in pediatric neural research. She'd applied for every position at the company. When the temporary medical aid posting appeared, to assist the CEO's son, Lincoln Larson, age 10, deaf since birth, she'd known. Fate or coincidence, it didn't matter. She was exactly where she needed to be. The car pulled up to the Larson estate just after 8 a.m., and Elizabeth felt her breath catch despite herself. This wasn't a home. It was a monument to wealth's ability to isolate. The mansion sprawled across 5 acres of manicured perfection, all modern angles and floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of architecture that won awards and destroyed intimacy. Every tree was placed with deliberate precision. Every stone in the driveway matched. Even the morning light seemed calculated, filtered through expensive glass to land at exactly the right angle. A woman in a severe gray suit met her at the entrance. "Ms. Ward, I'm Margaret, head of household staff. Mr. Larson expects punctuality." "I'm 10 minutes early," Elizabeth replied evenly. Margaret's smile was professional and cold as surgical steel. "Then you've already exceeded expectations. This way." The interior was exactly what Elizabeth expected. Marble floors that echoed every footstep. Abstract art that cost more than her childhood home. Furniture that looked uncomfortable because it was meant to be admired rather than used. Everything was pristine, controlled, lifeless. "Mr. Larson's schedule is demanding," Margaret explained as they walked. "He leaves by 7 a.m., returns by 9 p.m. if we're fortunate. Lincoln's previous specialists worked independently. We expect the same from you." "Noted," Elizabeth said, cataloging every detail. "And Lincoln's mother?" The pause was barely perceptible, but Elizabeth caught it. "Mrs. Larson passed during childbirth. Lincoln has never known her." Of course, Elizabeth thought. A boy who couldn't hear his mother's heartbeat because she'd stopped beating before he ever left the hospital. No wonder Alex Larson poured money into cures. He was trying to fix a loss that had nothing to do with deafness. They reached Lincoln's wing. Yes, the child had an entire wing, and Margaret pushed open doors that probably cost more than most cars. The room was obscene in its abundance. Toys stacked on designer shelves. Educational robotics kits. Art supplies in every color. Tablets loaded with learning software. A library of books organized by subject and size. A bed large enough for 3 children. Windows overlooking gardens that could have been Eden. Everything a child could want. Everything except sound. Everything except connection. "His medical files are there." Margaret gestured to a desk buried under folders. Specialists from Geneva, Tokyo, Boston, Munich all conclude the same diagnosis. Permanent congenital bilateral sensorineural deafness. No treatment available. Elizabeth approached the files, her trained eye immediately catching the sheer volume. Hundreds of pages. Dozens of specialists. MRIs, CT scans, auditory nerve tests, genetic panels. Alex Larson had thrown money at the problem the way some men threw punches. Desperately, repeatedly, uselessly. "Where is Lincoln now?" Elizabeth asked. "The garden. He prefers it in the mornings." She found him among the butterflies. Lincoln sat cross-legged on a stone bench, utterly still, watching a monarch butterfly dance around lavender blooms. His turquoise shirt was already smudged with grass stains. His shoes lay discarded on the path. He held a sketchbook, pencil moving in quick, confident strokes. Elizabeth approached slowly, making sure he could see her shadow before she entered his space. He looked up, and his face transformed. That same smile from yesterday, surprised and grateful that someone had returned. "Good morning," she signed. "You came back," he signed, his movements carrying a vulnerability that broke her heart. "Most people don't." "I promised, didn't I?" Elizabeth sat beside him, careful not to crowd. "What are you drawing?" He showed her the sketchbook. The drawing was remarkable. The butterfly captured mid-flight, wings spread, every detail precise. But around it, Lincoln had drawn something else. Sound waves, visualized as ripples emanating from the butterfly's wings, except the waves were crossed out, negated, erased. "I draw what I imagine sound looks like," Lincoln signed. "But I always cross it out, because I'll never know if I'm right." Elizabeth felt something crack inside her chest, the professional distance she'd tried to maintain, the objective detachment she'd promised herself. "Sound isn't just one thing," she signed. "Want me to show you what it feels like?" His eyes widened. "How?" She stood, gestured for him to follow. They walked to the garden fountain, a smaller echo of the one at headquarters. Elizabeth pressed his palm flat against the stone basin, then tapped the water's surface with different rhythms. Slow, fast, staccato, sustained. Lincoln's mouth opened in wonder as vibrations traveled through stone into his hand. She showed him how different materials carried different frequencies. The deep resonance of the fountain's base, the bright flutter of leaves in wind, the sharp crack of two stones knocked together. For an hour, they explored sound through touch. Lincoln laughed, silent but full of joy, as Elizabeth made the world vibrate in patterns he could finally understand. They moved inside when the sun grew too hot. Lincoln pulled out paints, and they created together, Elizabeth adding visual representations of rhythm, Lincoln layering colors that felt like music to him, even though he'd never heard a note. "Can I show you my favorite place?" he signed eventually. She nodded. He led her to a corner of the estate she hadn't seen, a small greenhouse, hidden behind the main house. Inside, butterflies filled the air like living confetti. Lincoln moved among them with practiced ease, knowing exactly how to hold still, how to let them land on his shoulders and hands. "They're deaf too," he signed. "Did you know? They can't hear anything, but they're still beautiful. They still matter." Elizabeth knelt beside him, watching a painted lady butterfly rest on his palm. "You know what else they can do?" she signed. "They can feel vibrations so small that humans with perfect hearing miss them. They sense the world in ways we can't imagine." Lincoln looked at her with something approaching hope. "Like a superpower?" "Exactly like a superpower." They stayed until the afternoon shadows grew long. Lincoln showed her drawings he'd made, stories he'd written, a whole internal world that no one had bothered to see because they were too busy trying to fix what they thought was broken. Then, as they walked back toward the house, it happened. Lincoln's face suddenly contorted. His hand flew to his left ear, pressing hard, his mouth opening in a silent cry of pain or confusion, or both. Elizabeth was beside him instantly. "What's wrong?" His hands shook as he signed. "Something is moving. In my ear. Like a heartbeat. But it's not mine." The world stopped. Those words, those exact words, the same ones Jamal had used 8 years ago, terrified and confused, before everything spiraled into infection and death. Elizabeth's professional training warred with her personal trauma. She forced her hands to remain steady as she signed. Does it hurt, or just feel strange? Strange. Wrong. Like something living inside me that isn't supposed to be there. She needed to see, needed to know. But she couldn't. Not without permission, not without proper equipment, not without risking everything if she was wrong. But what if she wasn't wrong? What if that same device, that same death sentence, was sitting inside Lincoln's ear right now, waiting to kill him the way it killed Jamal? I need you to be brave, Elizabeth signed. Can you let me examine your ear? Just look. Nothing more? Lincoln nodded, trusting her in a way that made Elizabeth want to scream. She had a small penlight in her medical bag. She tilted Lincoln's head, peered into his ear canal with the inadequate light. At first, nothing. Just normal anatomy, healthy tissue. Then she saw it. A faint irregularity. Deep in the canal, almost hidden by natural curves. A glint. Metallic. Wrong. Her hands didn't shake, but inside, she was screaming. Alex Larson arrived home at 9:30 p.m., which apparently counted as early. He found Elizabeth in Lincoln's room, the boy asleep in his obscenely large bed, medical files spread across the desk where she'd been reading for hours. Why are you still here? His voice carried suspicion and exhaustion in equal measure. The sharp suit looked rumpled now, the commanding presence softened by fatigue. Elizabeth stood, met his eyes directly. Because your son felt something today, something the specialists missed. That's impossible. The response was automatic, defensive. I've had the best doctors in the world examine him. Audiologists, neurologists, geneticists. If there was something there, they would have found it. Would they? Elizabeth kept her voice level. Or would they find exactly what they expected to find? Sometimes the most dangerous thing in medicine isn't what we miss. It's what we assume can't possibly be there. Alex moved to his son's bedside, looked down at Lincoln's sleeping face with an expression that was equal parts love and helplessness. What did he feel? He said it was like a heartbeat that wasn't his, movement, something foreign. Children imagine, do they? Elizabeth interrupted. Or do they describe what adults refuse to believe? Alex turned, and for the first time, she saw past the billionaire CEO to the exhausted father beneath. What do you want from me? Let me examine him, really examine him, with proper equipment, tomorrow morning. I've spent $7 million on examinations. Then what's one more? Elizabeth challenged. What do you have to lose? The silence stretched. Alex looked at his son, at this woman who'd somehow reached the boy in ways paid specialists never had, at 8 years of failure compressed into one impossible decision. I've lost enough already, he said quietly. Elizabeth understood. He wasn't talking about money. Tomorrow then, Alex said, moving toward the door. You can examine him tomorrow. Bring whatever equipment you need. But Ms. Ward, he paused, looked back at her with eyes that had seen too many false hopes die. Don't give him false hope. Don't make promises you can't keep. He's had enough disappointment. I won't promise anything, Elizabeth said. Except the truth. Alex nodded and left. Elizabeth was alone with the sleeping boy and her suspicions that felt too much like certainties. She turned to the computer, pulled up Lincoln's medical files. Started with the most recent, and worked backward through 8 years of documentation. MRIs from last year, auditory tests from 2 years ago, genetic panels from age 5. But when she reached the earliest files, the infant records, the birth documentation, the first weeks of Lincoln's life, they stopped. Not missing, redacted. Entire sections blacked out or marked confidential, or simply absent from the digital record. Someone had deliberately removed Lincoln's earliest medical history. Elizabeth pulled out her phone, photographed every page of the incomplete records, every redaction, every suspicious gap. She knew she was crossing ethical lines, possibly legal ones. She didn't care. Because somewhere in those missing files was the truth. And the truth had a name she recognized, a pattern she'd seen before, a device that had killed her brother and might be sitting inside Lincoln's ear right now, waiting to kill again. She opened her locket, looked at Jamal's photo. "I'm close," she whispered to the image. "So close. If I'm right, if this is what I think it is, then your death wasn't random. It was corporate murder, and it's still happening." The butterfly Lincoln had drawn earlier sat on the desk, crossed out sound waves, a reminder of everything he'd lost. Tomorrow, Elizabeth thought, she would look inside his ear with equipment that could see what others had missed. Tomorrow, she would either save this boy or confirm her worst fear, that the same company that killed Jamal had experimented on its CEO's own son. Tomorrow, the truth would finally have a chance to be heard. She just prayed she wasn't already too late. Elizabeth arrived at dawn carrying a case that had cost her 3 favors and one very uncomfortable conversation with a former colleague who worked in experimental audiology research. "Don't ask me where you got this," Dr. Patricia Chen had said, handing over the enhanced otoscope. "And for God's sake, be careful. This equipment can see things most doctors don't want to find." Now, standing in Lincoln's room, with early light streaming through those massive windows, Elizabeth understood exactly what Patricia had meant. The enhanced otoscope looked deceptively simple. Sleek black casing, fiber optic probe no thicker than a pencil, connected to a tablet that could magnify and document everything the probe encountered. But its imaging capabilities went far beyond standard medical equipment. It could detect metallic compounds embedded in organic tissue, map neural pathways in real time, and see through layers of biological camouflage that fooled conventional scans. It was designed to find things that weren't supposed to be there. Lincoln sat on his bed, already dressed, his hands moving nervously in his lap. When he saw Elizabeth, he signed immediately. "Will it hurt?" "I promise to be gentle," Elizabeth signed back, kneeling to his eye level. "If anything feels wrong, even a little bit, you tell me right away, okay?" He nodded, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Smart kid. He knew something was different about today. "Ms. Ward." Alex's voice came from the doorway. He stood with arms crossed, still wearing yesterday's exhaustion on his face like he'd never gone to bed. His eyes moved between his son and the equipment case with an expression that balanced hope and dread in equal measure. "Mr. Larson?" Elizabeth kept her voice professional, neutral. "Thank you for allowing this. Just be careful." The words came out rougher than he probably intended. "He's all I have." Elizabeth wanted to say something comforting, but comfort required dishonesty right now. Instead, she turned back to Lincoln and began with the standard examination, the kind any pediatrician would perform. She checked his outer ear for inflammation, looked for obvious abnormalities, tested his response to light touch. Everything appeared completely normal. "All right," she said softly, signing simultaneously. "Now I'm going to use the special camera. It might feel a little cold, but it won't hurt. Ready?" Lincoln took a breath and nodded. Elizabeth powered up the enhanced otoscope. The tablet screen flickered to life, showing a clear view of Lincoln's ear canal in extraordinary detail. She inserted the probe slowly, gently, watching the screen as tissue and bone materialized in high-definition clarity. At first, nothing unusual, just healthy anatomy, no signs of infection or damage. The kind of perfectly normal ear canal that would make any doctor conclude exactly what every specialist had concluded. Congenital deafness, no physical cause visible. Case closed. But Elizabeth kept going deeper, adjusting the angle, using the probe's advanced imaging to look beyond what conventional equipment could see. Then, there, a glint, barely perceptible, deep in the canal where tissue met nerve. Elizabeth's breath caught. She adjusted the probe's angle again, increased magnification, and the image on the tablet screen resolved into horrifying clarity. Metal, black, curved, embedded so deeply in Lincoln's auditory nerve that it had become part of him. Organic tissue had grown around it like a body trying to absorb something foreign, creating a kind of biological camouflage. But the device itself was clearly artificial. She could see the precision of its construction, the deliberate curves of its design. And it was pulsing, faintly, rhythmically, like it had its own heartbeat, like it was alive. Elizabeth pulled back from Lincoln, her hands trembling despite years of professional training. "What?" Alex was beside her in an instant. "What did you see?" "There's a foreign object in his ear." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Deep, very deep. It's been there a long time, years, probably since infancy. Tissue has grown around it, which is why standard scans missed it." "That's impossible." Alex's face had gone pale. "He's been scanned dozens of times. MRIs, CT scans, specialists from—" "Not with this kind of equipment," Elizabeth interrupted. "And not by someone looking for something that shouldn't exist." She turned the tablet toward him. "Look!" The image on the screen was undeniable. Alex stared at it, and Elizabeth watched his expression shift from disbelief to recognition to horror. "You've seen something like this before," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Alex sat heavily in the chair beside Lincoln's bed, his corporate armor finally cracking completely. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of secrets kept too long. "In the early days of Larson Dynamics, we developed neural implants, direct interface technology for sensory restoration. It was going to revolutionize medicine, give hearing to the deaf, sight to the blind, sensation to the paralyzed." He looked at his hands like they belonged to a stranger. But there were complications. Biological rejection, neural inflammation. The trials were shut down. Everything was supposed to be destroyed. Elizabeth's voice came out like steel. "Not everything." Lincoln had been watching their lips, reading the conversation with growing understanding. Now he touched Elizabeth's arm, his eyes wide with questions he didn't know how to sign. Elizabeth showed him the tablet screen, let him see the thing that had lived inside him all his life. His small hand rose to touch his ear, feeling the surface while looking at what lay beneath. "Can you take it out?" he signed. "I can try," Elizabeth said aloud, signing simultaneously. "But I need your father's permission, and I need a surgical team on standby in case something goes wrong." Alex stood abruptly. "If it's been there since birth, removing it could kill him," Elizabeth finished. "Or it could give him what you've spent millions trying to buy." The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Alex looked at his son, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. Saw the hope and fear mixing in those green eyes. Saw the boy who'd lived his entire life in silence, not knowing that someone had put that silence there deliberately. Lincoln's hands moved slowly, deliberately. "I want to try. I want to hear my father's voice." Tears spilled down Alex Larson's face. The first genuine emotion Elizabeth had witnessed from the billionaire who could buy anything except this moment, this choice, this terrifying leap into the unknown. "Prepare the private medical suite," Alex said into his phone, his voice breaking. "Full surgical team. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what time it is. Get them there now." Elizabeth knelt beside Lincoln, signed, "You're the bravest person I know." He smiled, small, scared, but trusting. As they gathered supplies to leave, Elizabeth felt Alex's eyes on her. She turned, met his gaze. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked. "You could have referred us to a specialist, filed a report. Let someone else take the risk. Why you?" Elizabeth's hand moved to her locket, unconscious, automatic. "Because I couldn't save my brother. But maybe I can save your son." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Alex was only beginning to understand. "What happened to your brother?" His voice was barely a whisper. Elizabeth looked at Lincoln, gathering his courage for what came next. Looked at Alex, finally asking the right questions. Looked at the tablet screen still displaying that terrible device. Her silence was answer enough. Alex's world tilted on its axis as understanding dawned. This woman wasn't here by accident. This wasn't fate or coincidence or divine intervention. This was reckoning. And it was wearing a magenta blouse and carrying the ghost of a boy who'd died screaming from a device that looked exactly like the one inside his son's ear. The private medical suite at Larson Dynamics existed in the space between hospital and laboratory. Chrome surfaces, LED lighting, and technology most hospitals couldn't afford. Within 2 hours, a full surgical team had assembled. Dr. Marcus Webb, a neurosurgeon with credentials that read like fantasy. An anesthesiologist whose hands had worked on presidents. 3 surgical nurses moving with synchronized precision. They listened as Elizabeth explained what she intended to do. "Absolutely not." Dr. Webb's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Ms. Ward, this requires a trained neurosurgeon. One wrong move could cause permanent damage or death." "I found it," Elizabeth said calmly. "I remove it." "This isn't about ego." "You're right. It's about knowing exactly what that device is and how it kills. I've seen one before." Elizabeth met his eyes without flinching. "Do you?" Alex stepped forward, still wearing yesterday's rumpled suit. "She found it. She removes it. Dr. Webb, you'll supervise. Intervene only if absolutely necessary." Webb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Elizabeth had insisted on local anesthetic only. The team protested until she explained with clinical precision. "He needs to be conscious. If the device causes neural disruption during extraction, we need to know immediately. An unconscious patient can't tell us he's seizing until it's too late." Lincoln lay on the surgical table, his head secured in a gentle brace, his wide green eyes tracking Elizabeth's every movement. She'd explained everything through signs, promising honesty over comfort. At the scrub sink, Elizabeth whispered words she hadn't spoken in 8 years, a prayer Jamal had taught her. "God of small things and broken pieces, guide these hands, make them steady, make them true." Her hands were steady as stone when she returned to the table, the enhanced otoscope's feed displayed on 3 monitors. Elizabeth navigated Lincoln's ear canal with the confidence of someone following a map only she could read. The device appeared on screen, that terrible black coil, pulsing with its alien heartbeat. "My God," Dr. Webb whispered. "That's grafted directly into the auditory nerve." "Deeper than it should be," Elizabeth confirmed. "Beginning extraction." The room fell silent, except for Lincoln's heart monitor. Elizabeth inserted microforceps alongside the probe, her movements guided by instinct and muscle memory from a night 8 years ago. The forceps touched the device. Lincoln's hand twitched. "What do you feel?" she signed with her free hand. "Warm, buzzing, like something waking up." Elizabeth began to ease the device away from nerve tissue. Sweat beaded on her forehead. This was more complex than Jamal's had been. That device had been in place for weeks. This one had lived here for a decade. Then the alarm screamed. Every monitor erupted in warnings. Lincoln's neural activity spiked wildly, his body rigid, eyes rolling back. Dr. Webb moved to take over. "Ms. Ward, step aside." "No!" Elizabeth blocked him. "It's waking up. The device is reacting to removal. If you touch it now, you'll trigger a full neural cascade. Trust me or get out." "How can you possibly know?" "Because I watched it happen before. I watched my brother die because surgeons pulled it out wrong." Alex's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone step back. Let her work." On screen, the device pulsed faster, glowing with faint blue light. Elizabeth watched the pattern, counted intervals. The device had a shutdown sequence, but you had to pull at exactly the right moment. She waited. Counted. Felt time compress into heartbeats. Now. "I'm pulling it out. Now." She grasped the device and pulled in one smooth, continuous motion. The resistance was immediate. It clung to nerve tissue with microscopic tendrils. Elizabeth pulled with a surgeon's precision and a sister's desperation, with 8 years of grief channeled into her hands. The device came free, a black metallic coil dripping with biological fluid. As it left Lincoln's body, it emitted a final pulse of blue light so bright everyone flinched. Then it went dark. Silence. Lincoln lay completely still. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, Elizabeth thought she'd failed. Then Lincoln gasped. His eyes flew open, wider than before, transformed by wonder. The heart monitor beeped. Lincoln's head turned sharply toward the sound, tracking it with precision he'd never had before. Elizabeth held the device up, stamped on its surface. LD Echo 07. Larson Dynamics. Project Echo. Subject 07. Lincoln made a sound, not a sign. A sound. His mouth opened and a noise emerged, rough, unpracticed. His hand flew to his throat, feeling the vibration. He heard the rustle of surgical gowns, the hum of lights, Dr. Webb's sharp breath. Then Lincoln turned toward his father and shaped a word he'd never spoken. "Dad?" The room exploded into chaos. Doctors checked vitals. Nurses documented everything. But Alex heard none of it. He pushed through them all and fell to his knees beside the gurney, pressing his forehead to his son's. "My son," he whispered. "My son. My son." Elizabeth stepped back, still clutching the device. She looked at that logo again. Larson Dynamics. Project Echo, Subject 07. The company that killed her brother was the same company that stole this boy's hearing. And its CEO had no idea his own company had experimented on his own son. The device was out. Lincoln could hear, but the reckoning, the real reckoning, was only beginning. Lincoln just heard his father's voice for the first time. But the device Elizabeth pulled out reveals something far more sinister. If this story is hitting you in the chest, let me know in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed corporate greed destroy innocent lives? Have you ever had to fight for truth when everyone wanted silence? Drop your story below. This community listens. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Click that button because this story is about to get even more intense. Hours later, Lincoln sat propped against pillows in the recovery suite, crying with a confusion that broke hearts and mended them simultaneously. Every sound was new, terrifying, wonderful. The hiss of the IV drip made him flinch. The soft beep of monitors fascinated him. He'd press his hands over his ears, then remove them, testing whether the sounds were real or imagined. When a nurse's shoes squeaked against the floor, he gasped like he'd witnessed magic. Alex hadn't left his side. He sat in a chair pulled so close their knees touched, and he kept saying his son's name just to hear Lincoln respond with his own rough, unpracticed voice. Lincoln. Dad. Lincoln. I hear you. Every exchange brought fresh tears to both their faces. The medical team was baffled. Dr. Webb had run every test twice, consulted textbooks, called colleagues. This shouldn't be possible, he kept muttering. 10 years of auditory deprivation. The neural pathways should be atrophied beyond recovery. But he's processing sound like someone who went deaf yesterday, not a decade ago. Elizabeth watched from outside the room, standing in the hallway where fluorescent lights hummed with a frequency Lincoln would be learning to ignore soon enough. The device sat sealed in a sterile container in her bag, its weight both literal and metaphorical. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt hollow. Alex found her there an hour later. His face carried gratitude and confusion in equal measure, his eyes red from crying but sharp with questions that wouldn't wait. "How did you know?" His voice was quiet but urgent. "How did you know exactly where to look?" "What to look for?" Elizabeth's facade, the professional medical aid, the composed stranger, cracked like glass under pressure. "Because I held my brother while a device just like this one killed him." The words fell between them like stones into still water. Alex's face went white. "What?" 8 years ago, a free medical trial promising revolutionary hearing technology. My brother Jamal was 7, deaf, vibrant, alive. Elizabeth's voice stayed steady through sheer force of will. 3 months later, he was dead from an infection caused by a neural implant that was supposed to save him. And Larson Dynamics was listed as the sponsor. Alex stumbled backward like he'd been struck. That's impossible. I shut down Project Echo before human trials. I terminated the program." "Did you?" Elizabeth pulled a folder from her bag, worn, filled with documents that had taken years to collect. "Or did you just stop paying attention?" She handed it to him. Alex opened it with shaking hands. Medical trial records, consent forms signed by desperate parents who couldn't afford real treatment. 20 names listed in clinical typeface. Beside Jamal Ward's name, circled in red ink that looked like accusation, were 2 words: subject terminated. Beside 17 other names: device failed, fatality. 3 survivors, 17 dead, 20 families destroyed. Alex read each name, each outcome, his hands trembling harder with every page. I shut this down. I gave explicit orders." "Did someone else continue it after you looked away?" Elizabeth's voice was steel wrapped in grief. "Did someone decide that a few dead children were acceptable losses in pursuit of a breakthrough?" Alex looked up at her, and she saw the exact moment he understood. The exact moment the billionaire CEO realized his empire had been built on graves he'd never bothered to count. At midnight, Alex Larson stormed into his own company's headquarters like an invading army. Security tried to stop him. He fired them on the spot. It protested access protocols. He threatened to dismantle the entire department. By the time he reached the archived servers, 3 lawyers were calling his phone, and he'd ignored them all. "Unseal Project Echo," he commanded. "Everything, now." The files were encrypted, buried under layers of security that required 6 passwords and 3 biometric scans. But they were there. They'd always been there. The truth emerged in clinical documentation and falsified reports. Dr. Raymond Chen, head of medical development, had continued trials after Alex shut them down. Used shell companies to hide the funding. Falsified safety reports. Buried the failures in NDAs and legal threats. The goal? Perfect the technology in secret. Then present Alex with a miracle he couldn't refuse and a profit margin that would make headlines. 20 children. 17 deaths. 3 survivors with permanent damage. All hidden behind corporate shells and redacted files. And then Alex found the deepest file, the one that made his vision tunnel and his hands go numb. Subject 07, Lincoln Larson, his own son. Implanted at 6 weeks old during a routine wellness check by a pediatrician on Larson Dynamics' payroll. The device was meant to enhance neural development, give the CEO's son advantages other children didn't have. Instead, it destroyed Lincoln's auditory processing, created the deafness it was meant to prevent. The same doctor who'd diagnosed Lincoln as congenitally deaf, who'd looked Alex in the eye and said nothing can be done, was the one who'd put the device there. The same doctor who'd been collecting payments from Larson Dynamics for 10 years of silence. Alex read it all. Then he read it again. Then he put his head in his hands and understood what it meant to be complicit through ignorance, guilty through negligence, monstrous through blind ambition. He found Elizabeth in the hospital chapel at 3 a.m., sitting in a pew that smelled of old wood and older grief. She held a photograph, a young boy with Jamal's bright smile frozen in time. "I'm sorry." Alex's voice cracked on the words. "I'm so deeply sorry. I didn't know. Your ignorance doesn't bring him back." Elizabeth didn't look up. "Your money doesn't resurrect the dead." "No." Alex sat heavily beside her, leaving space between them like a chasm. "But maybe it can make sure no one else dies." Elizabeth finally looked at him. In the dim chapel light, she saw something she didn't expect in a billionaire's eyes: genuine remorse. Not the practiced contrition of a CEO managing a PR crisis, but real, devastating recognition of harm caused. "What are you going to do?" Alex stood, straightened his jacket, the CEO armor sliding back into place. But it fit differently now, weighted with purpose instead of power, responsibility instead of ambition. "I'm going to burn it all down. Every lie, every cover-up. Every person who knew and stayed silent." His voice carried the cold certainty of someone who'd made an irrevocable decision. "Even if it destroys me." "Your board will fight you," Elizabeth said quietly. "Your shareholders will sue. You'll lose everything you've built." "Let them." Alex turned to face her fully. "I've spent a decade building an empire. I'll spend the rest of my life tearing out its rotten foundation." He extended his hand, not as an employer to employee, but as someone asking for partnership in the impossible. "Help me. You know this horror better than anyone. You've been hunting it for 8 years. Help me make sure it ends." Elizabeth looked at his hand. The hand of the man whose company killed her brother. The hand that had signed checks and approved budgets without asking where the money went or what bodies it bought. But also the hand of a father who'd wept over his son's first word, who was willing to destroy himself to make things right. She thought of Lincoln, hearing his father's voice for the first time. Thought of Jamal, who never got that chance. Thought of 17 other children whose names deserved to be remembered instead of buried. She took his hand. "Not for you," she said. "For every child who can't speak for themselves." Their handshake sealed something more binding than any NDA, a promise that the truth, all of it, no matter how ugly, would finally be heard. A week passed in secret warfare. Alex and Elizabeth worked through nights in a conference room Alex had swept for surveillance, compiling evidence that read like an indictment of everything Larson Dynamics claimed to stand for. Medical records, financial transactions routing through shell companies, internal emails with subject lines like "subject attrition acceptable" and "manage family expectations." Elizabeth contacted the other families, the ones she'd been tracking for years, the ones who'd signed NDAs and taken hush money because they had no other choice. Parents who'd lost children, siblings who survived with permanent damage. Each conversation was a knife wound reopening. 20 families, 17 dead children, 3 survivors who would never be whole. Mrs. Patricia Williams, who lost twin daughters at age 6. "They told us it was meningitis, just bad luck. We believed them." Marcus Chen, no relation to Raymond, now 19, deaf in one ear, seizures controlled by medication he'd need for life. "I was subject 14. I remember the screams." Each story broke Alex a little more. These weren't statistics or acceptable losses or the price of progress. These were consequences of his blind ambition, his failure to look closely at what his company was doing in his name. "I built this," he said one night, staring at photographs of children who would never grow up. "I didn't pull the trigger, but I built the gun." "Yes," Elizabeth said, "because he didn't deserve comfort. Now help me make sure it never fires again." The emergency board meeting was called for Thursday at 9 a.m. Full attendance mandatory, no exceptions. The boardroom occupied the top floor of Larson Dynamics, glass walls overlooking a city that looked like a kingdom from this height. A throne room of capitalism, where decisions worth billions were made over coffee and pastries. Senior executives arrived confident, ties perfect, smiles practiced. Another crisis to manage, another check to write, another news cycle to survive. Dr. Raymond Chen entered last, his smile widest of all. Head of Medical Development, architect of innovation. The man who'd continued Project Echo in secret and called dead children acceptable attrition. He didn't notice Elizabeth sitting quietly in the corner, a folder on her lap and rage in her eyes. Alex stood at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence replaced by something colder, more dangerous. Gentlemen, we need to discuss Project Echo. The temperature in the room dropped. Several board members exchanged glances. Margaret Torres, General Counsel, sat up straighter. Dr. Chen's smile faltered. That project was terminated 15 years ago. Why would we? Alex slammed something on the glass table with enough force to make everyone jump. The device. Black, curved, still stained with biological residue. The thing that had lived inside his son's ear for 10 years. This was pulled from my son's ear 1 week ago. Alex's voice was deadly calm. Care to explain? Before Chen could answer, Alex pressed a remote. Every screen in the boardroom lit up with documents. Medical records, death certificates, financial transactions, photographs of children who would never grow old. Names appeared in stark typeface. Jamal Ward, age 7. Subject terminated. Sarah and Sophie Williams, age 6. Subject terminated. Marcus Chen, age 9. Device failed. Permanent damage. 20 names. 20 families. 20 lives destroyed. Dr. Chen moved toward the door. Security blocked it. Alex's personal team. Loyal to him, not the company. You continued trials after I shut them down. Alex's voice could have cut steel. You used children as test subjects. You buried the failures and called it science. Chen's composure cracked. It was sound science. A few setbacks are normal and experimental. Elizabeth stood. Every eye turned to her. My brother was 7 years old. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. He wasn't a setback. He wasn't acceptable attrition. He was a child who loved butterflies and signing his name and watching cartoons with captions. And your device killed him. The silence was absolute. Chen's face flushed red. You wanted revolutionary technology, Alex. You wanted to change the world, to leave a legacy. I gave you that. Yes, there were casualties, but that's the price of progress. Every innovation requires sacrifice. You implanted that device in my son. Alex's voice shook with controlled fury. In my son. Chen's laugh was desperate, manic. He was the perfect test case. Don't you see? If the CEO's own son benefited from the technology, if Lincoln Larson could hear because of our innovation, the company would be worth trillions. You would have thanked me. The room gasped. The full scope of the betrayal landed like a physical blow. You experimented on a 6-week-old infant, Alex said slowly, and watched him suffer for 10 years and thought I'd thank you? Margaret Torres stood abruptly. Alex, I understand you're upset, but if we expose this publicly, the lawsuits will bankrupt the company. Shareholders will revolt. Thousands of employees will lose their jobs. Think about the greater good. The greater good? Alex turned on her. Tell that to Elizabeth. Tell that to the parents who buried children. Tell that to Marcus Chen, who has seizures because we decided his brain was acceptable collateral damage. I'm trying to protect your legacy. My legacy, Alex interrupted, is sitting in a hospital room learning what sounds are. That's the only legacy that matters now. He turned back to the board, his decision already made. Effective immediately, Dr. Raymond Chen is terminated and will face criminal charges. Project Echo's complete files will be released to the Department of Justice and the press. Larson Dynamics will establish a victim compensation fund with no cap and no NDAs. The board erupted. You'll destroy us. The stockholders. This is corporate suicide. Alex's voice cut through the chaos. Then I'll die with my conscience clean. Security escorted Chen out. He screamed threats, promised revenge, invoked lawyers and consequences. His voice faded down the hallway like a curse losing its power. The board members sat in stunned silence, calculating their exits, their liability, their futures. Elizabeth approached Alex. You know they'll try to stop you, fight you, maybe even succeed. I know. Alex's voice was steady. But for the first time in 20 years, I'm not building something. I'm fixing something. Through the glass walls, they saw movement below. Reporters gathering like birds, sensing blood. Someone had leaked the meeting. The news cycle was already beginning. Margaret whispered, "It's too late to control the narrative now." Alex walked to the window, looked down at his empire spread beneath him like a kingdom about to fall. Good, he said quietly. Truth doesn't need to be controlled. He stood there watching as the first camera crews arrived, as his carefully constructed world began to burn, and felt something he hadn't felt in a decade. Peace. The story broke within hours, spreading across the globe like wildfire through dry tinder. Billionaire CEO exposes own company's fatal human experiments on children. Tech mogul's son saved by medical aid, who lost brother to same device. Larson Dynamics, innovation or murder. Cable news ran 24/7 coverage. Elizabeth's face appeared on every screen. The woman who saved the billionaire's son. Her cornrowed hair and magenta blouse frozen in photographs taken outside Larson Dynamics. She looked younger in the images than she felt. Victim families came forward, their stories no longer silenced by NDAs and fear. Mrs. Williams spoke through tears about her twin daughters. Marcus Chen showed his surgical scars on camera. Jamal's photo circulated with the caption, Subject 03, age 7, the boy who started it all. The public divided sharply. Some called Alex a hero for whistleblowing, for choosing truth over profit. Others called him complicit, a villain who'd looked away while children died in his company's name. Both were right. The emergency shareholders meeting was digital chaos, thousands attending virtually, their faces tiled across screens like an angry jury. Larson Dynamics' stock had plummeted 40% in a single day. Billions evaporated. Retirement funds cratered. Major investors wanted blood. You've destroyed this company, a hedge fund manager's voice crackled through speakers. Billions in value, gone. Step down. This is corporate suicide. Another voice, angrier. You had a responsibility to shareholders. Alex faced them all from the empty boardroom, alone except for cameras broadcasting his response worldwide. I'm guilty, he said quietly, of negligence, of blind trust, of caring more about innovation than the lives it destroyed. His voice strengthened. But I won't run from it. I'll spend everything I have, every dollar, every asset, making this right. If that bankrupts the company, so be it. Some things matter more than stock prices. Like what? Someone shouted. Like making sure no parent ever buries a child for our profit again. The meeting ended with calls for his removal. Alex didn't care. He'd already made his choice. While Alex's empire burned, Lincoln was drowning in sound. Everything was too loud. Car horns on distant streets sent him into panic attacks, his hands clamped over his ears, his body rigid with sensory overload. Conversations in other rooms became unbearable noise. The hum of refrigerators, the tick of clocks, the whisper of air through vents. Sounds hearing people filtered unconsciously, assaulted him without mercy. Make it stop, he signed desperately to Elizabeth, tears streaming. I can't think. I can't breathe. Audiologists worked with him, prescribed exercises and coping strategies. But it was Elizabeth who understood what they couldn't. Lincoln wasn't just learning to hear. He was learning to survive in a world that had always been too loud for comfort, and no one had bothered to turn down the volume. She created quiet hours, controlled environments with soft music, gentle voices, sounds introduced gradually like a language learned one word at a time. She taught him to identify individual sounds instead of experiencing them as chaos. The rustle of leaves separate from wind, footsteps distinct from voices, the world as symphony instead of cacophony. Slowly, Lincoln began to separate sounds, to find beauty instead of chaos. One afternoon, sitting in the garden with Elizabeth, he spoke his first full sentence aloud without prompting. "Elizabeth, thank you for making me brave." His voice was still rough, still learning, but it carried gratitude that needed no interpretation. Late that night, Alex worked in his study, drafting the victim compensation framework. Elizabeth was upstairs with Lincoln, reading him a story, signing and speaking simultaneously so he could learn both languages. Neither heard the shadow moving outside until glass shattered. Dr. Raymond Chen had escaped custody. Bribed a guard, some said, or simply walked out during a transport transfer. Details didn't matter. What mattered was the madness in his eyes and the syringe in his hand as he crashed through Alex's study door. "If I'm going down," Chen snarled, "I'm taking you with me." They fought. Furniture crashed, papers scattered, glass shattered. Chen was younger, desperate, fueled by rage at watching his career destroyed. Alex fought with the fury of a father protecting his second chance. But Chen was winning. Elizabeth heard the chaos from upstairs. She ran, instinct overriding caution, and arrived to see Chen straddling Alex, the syringe inches from his neck, some chemical cocktail meant to kill fast and look like a heart attack. She didn't hesitate. The medical textbook, Gray's Anatomy, heavy as a brick, was in her hands. She swung with all her strength, with 8 years of grief transformed into kinetic force. Chen collapsed, unconscious before he hit the floor. Police arrived within minutes. This time, there was no bail, no transport transfer, no escape. Chen was gone, and everyone knew it. Alex sat on the floor, bleeding from cuts on his face, staring at Elizabeth like she'd performed another miracle. "You saved my life. You gave my brother's death meaning," Elizabeth said quietly. "It's the least I could do." The assassination attempt changed everything. Public opinion shifted. People saw Alex not as a corporate villain, but as a father trying to atone, willing to die for his confession. Victim families released a joint statement. Alex Larson is doing what no company has ever done, choosing people over profit. Donations flooded the Victim Compensation Fund, not just from Larson's liquidated assets, but from ordinary people moved by the story. $10, $20, $100. Teachers and nurses and parents who understood what it meant to lose a child. A movement began on social media. Listen, With Your Heart news outlets wanted Elizabeth for interviews. She refused most, but agreed to one, a primetime special featuring families of other victims. She sat with parents who'd lost children, with Marcus Chen showing his scars, with photographs of the dead arranged like an altar behind them. "I didn't save Lincoln for redemption," Elizabeth said, her voice steady despite cameras and millions watching. "I saved him because I couldn't save Jamal. But maybe, if enough of us speak up, no parent will have to bury a child for corporate profit." The interview went viral. Millions watched, cried, shared. Jamal's face became the symbol of children stolen by ambition, disguised as innovation. Late that evening, Alex, Elizabeth, and Lincoln sat in the garden where butterflies still danced among flowers. Lincoln practiced identifying sounds: wind rustling leaves, distant traffic humming, a cricket's rhythmic chirp. Each sound was a victory, a piece of the world returned to him. He turned to his father suddenly. "Dad, What does your heartbeat sound like? Alex placed Lincoln's hand on his chest, over his heart. Can you hear it? Lincoln closed his eyes, concentrated. After a moment, he smiled. Pure, beautiful, whole. It sounds like home. Elizabeth watched them. A family healing, truth replacing silence, love filling spaces where money had failed. But she knew the hardest battle was still coming. Exposing one company's crimes wasn't enough. Systemic change required more than confession. It required revolution. And Elizabeth Ward, who'd spent 8 years preparing for this moment, was just getting started. Elizabeth just saved Alex's life. The world is finally listening. But justice isn't served yet. If you're invested in seeing Dr. Chen pay for what he did, if you want to witness real accountability, drop a like on this video right now. Every like tells YouTube to share this story with more people who need to hear it. And share this video, because stories like this need to echo beyond these walls. Now let's get to the trial. 6 months later, Dr. Raymond Chen stood trial in a courthouse that felt too small for the weight of what it contained. Criminal negligence, fraud, 20 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 1 for each child, 17 who died, 3 whose lives were irreparably damaged. The charges read like an indictment of ambition itself. The gallery was packed with victims' families, faces marked by grief that time hadn't healed, only taught them to carry. Elizabeth sat among them. Jamal's photograph pinned to her jacket like a badge of honor and heartbreak. Around her, Mrs. Williams, clutching a photo of her twins. Marcus Chen's parents, their son sitting beside them, his hearing aid visible. 20 families who'd been silenced by NDAs and threats, now filling the room with their presence. Alex Larson was called as the prosecution's star witness. He took the stand looking nothing like the billionaire CEO who'd once commanded boardrooms. His suit was simple, his face marked by 6 months of public scrutiny and private penance. When he raised his hand to swear truth, his voice was steady, but stripped of its former authority. The prosecutor was gentle, but thorough. Mr. Larson, how did Dr. Chen gain access to these children? I trusted him, Alex said quietly. I built Larson Dynamics on the promise of innovation, technology that could change lives. I gave him funding, resources, freedom to pursue breakthrough research. He perverted that trust into exploitation. You're saying you had no knowledge of the trials? I'm saying I failed to oversee what was done in my name. I signed budgets without asking where the money went. I approved research without demanding accountability. My son paid the price for my negligence. The defense attorney stood. Expensive suit, practiced sneer. Mr. Larson, you expect this jury to believe you knew nothing about human trials conducted by your own company? No, Alex said evenly. I expect you to believe I should have known. That's my guilt. His, he pointed at Chen, is the action. I was negligent. He was criminal. Both things can be true. The defense had no response. Elizabeth's testimony came next. She walked to the stand carrying medical records 8 years old, pages worn from being read too many times. She spoke about Jamal with the precision of someone who'd practiced this testimony in dreams and nightmares. My brother was 7, deaf since birth, but vibrant. They promised revolutionary technology. They delivered death. She presented the medical records, pointed to the pattern visible to anyone willing to look. Every child followed the same trajectory. Hope in week 1, pain in week 2, seizures by week 4, death or permanent damage by week 12. Dr. Chen knew after the 3rd fatality. The medical reports are clear. He documented the failure pattern himself. He continued anyway. The defense tried to break her. But your brother signed up voluntarily, didn't he? Consent forms were signed. Elizabeth's voice cut like a scalpel. He was 7. Children can't consent to being experiments. His mother, my mother, signed forms she barely understood, desperate for help we couldn't afford. That's not consent. That's exploitation. The courtroom was silent. The device itself was presented as Exhibit A, the black coil removed from Lincoln's ear, now sealed in clear plastic like evidence of a crime it was. Forensic experts testified with clinical precision. The neural interface design was fundamentally flawed. It caused inflammatory response in 95% of subjects. Continued trials after such failure rates constitutes willful endangerment. Chen's own notes were read aloud. Subject attrition higher than projected, but breakthrough imminent. Acceptable losses for revolutionary outcome. His defense crumbled like a structure built on sand. Then came the victim impact statements. Mrs. Patricia Williams, trembling. My daughters were 6. They died holding hands because they were too scared to let go. Dr. Chen called that acceptable attrition. Marcus Chen's father. My son lives with seizures controlled by medication. He'll never be whole. We went bankrupt, paying medical bills for damage your device caused. Marcus himself, now 19, his voice steady despite trauma. I was subject 14. I remember the screams, mine and others. I remember Dr. Chen taking notes while we suffered. He knew. He always knew. Elizabeth listened to each story and saw Jamal in every face. The courtroom wept. Even the judge paused to compose herself, her professional distance cracking under the weight of accumulated grief. After 3 days, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. Chen showed no remorse. He blamed Alex, blamed market pressures, blamed ambition. Everyone but himself. Sentencing, 25 years, no parole. As officers led him away, Chen spat at Alex. You built this empire on risk. Don't act holy now. Alex didn't flinch. I built it on dreams. You turned them into nightmares. Outside the courthouse, families gathered, some celebrating justice, others mourning losses no verdict could reverse. Press surrounded Elizabeth, cameras flashing, questions shouted. She ignored them all, turning only to the families. This verdict doesn't bring anyone back, she said quietly. But maybe it stops the next tragedy. A mother whose son survived approached, tears streaming. Thank you for being brave when the rest of us couldn't. Elizabeth hugged her. We were all brave. We just needed someone to listen. That evening, Elizabeth visited Jamal's grave for the first time in months. The cemetery was quiet, golden hour light filtering through trees. She knelt before the small headstone. Jamal Ward, beloved son and brother, and placed the printed verdict against the stone. I couldn't save you, baby brother, she whispered. But I saved others. I hope that's enough. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to find Alex and Lincoln, flowers in the boys' hands. She hadn't known they'd followed. Lincoln knelt beside her, placed the flowers carefully, then signed with his hands while speaking aloud, his voice clearer now after months of practice. I never knew him, but I'm alive because he wasn't forgotten. Something inside Elizabeth broke, the wall she'd built 8 years ago to survive grief finally crumbling. Sobs she'd held for nearly a decade poured out, her body shaking with the release of carrying grief alone for too long. Alex didn't speak. He simply stood beside her as darkness fell, a silent witness to pain he couldn't fix, but could finally acknowledge. 3 people bound by tragedy, united by truth, standing together at the grave of a boy who died so others might live. The wind rustled through trees, carrying sounds Lincoln was learning to love. And somewhere, Elizabeth thought, Jamal was finally at peace. Justice has been served in the courtroom. But the real legacy? That's what we're about to see. Before we get to the final chapter, take a moment. If this story moved you, if Jamal's memory matters to you, if you believe corporations need to be held accountable for human cost, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below with one word that describes how you feel right now. Angry? Hopeful? Inspired? Let me know. 1 year later, the building looked the same from the outside. glass and steel reaching toward sky, reflecting clouds and ambition in equal measure. But everything inside had changed. Larson Dynamics no longer existed as a tech empire. In its place, the Ward Initiative, a humanitarian foundation dedicated to protecting vulnerable populations from corporate exploitation. Funded by Alex's liquidated assets, every stock option, every investment, every dollar that had built an empire, now repurposed to tear down the systems that had allowed children to become casualties of progress. The headquarters occupied the same building where Lincoln had first heard his father's voice. Elizabeth insisted on that. "We don't hide from history," she'd said. "We transform it." On opening day, she stood on the steps addressing a crowd of press, families, and advocates. Director of Patient Advocacy now, wearing the title like armor forged from grief. "1 year ago, I pulled a piece of metal from a child's ear," Elizabeth said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "Today, we're pulling back the curtain on an entire industry." The Ward Initiative exists to make sure no parent ever has to choose between hope and their child's life. Behind her, the mission statement was carved in stone: protect, advocate, transform. Then Lincoln stepped forward. At 11, his voice was clearer, still carried the softness of someone learning sound, but stronger now, confident. He took the microphone with hands that no longer trembled. "For most of my life, I was silent," he began. "Not by choice, but by someone else's greed. My dad couldn't hear me. I couldn't hear him. We lived in the same house but different worlds." He paused, looked at Elizabeth, standing beside him. "Elizabeth gave me sound. But more than that, she gave my dad ears to listen." The crowd erupted in applause. Many were crying, parents who'd lost children, survivors who'd found community. People who understood that some silences were crimes disguised as innovation. The initiative's first year had been a testament to what accountability could accomplish. Marcus Chen received reconstructive surgery, funded fully by the initiative. His seizures were managed now, his future no longer defined by being Subject 14. A class action lawsuit against 3 other biotech companies succeeded, setting legal precedent that human experimentation required genuine consent, genuine oversight, genuine consequences. Legislation passed, Jamal's Law, mandating independent oversight for all pediatric medical trials. Named after the boy whose death had sparked a revolution, signed by a president who called it long overdue. 27 families received full compensation, not from legal settlements or corporate negotiation, but from Alex Larson's personal fortune, given without conditions or NDAs. Alex himself was unrecognizable from the CEO who'd once commanded boardrooms. He wore jeans now, simple shirts, worked alongside staff cataloging corporate misdeeds across industries. His new mission: document every hidden trial, every buried failure, every child sacrificed to ambition. "If I could hide my own company's crimes through ignorance," he told a reporter, "how many others are doing the same?" He was writing a book, The Price of Progress, a CEO's confession. All proceeds directed to the initiative. Every chapter an indictment of the systems he'd once embodied. Elizabeth and Lincoln had become inseparable, family now, not aide and patient. They visited schools together, teaching sign language and advocating for hearing safety. Lincoln demonstrated how sound could overwhelm, how silence could be chosen rather than imposed. Elizabeth spoke about her brother, keeping Jamal's memory alive through action. One afternoon, Lincoln asked quietly, "Do you think Jamal would be happy?" Elizabeth smiled, tears threatening. "I think he'd be proud. And I think he'd love that a kid named Lincoln is changing the world in his name." Lincoln hugged her, the sister he'd never had, the brother she'd lost, connected across time and tragedy and transformation. The courtyard fountain remained, but now it sat at the center of a memorial garden. 20 names were engraved in stone around it, 17 who died, 3 who survived damaged, all of them remembered. Jamal Ward's name was first, his photograph embedded in glass that caught light, like hope refusing to die. Elizabeth and Alex stood before it while Lincoln splashed water, laughing at sounds he'd never take for granted. "I spent 15 years building an empire that could change the world," Alex said quietly. "It took my son's silence to realize I was changing it for the worse. You didn't know. I should have. That's the lesson, isn't it? Power without conscience is just tyranny in a suit." Elizabeth nodded. "And conscience without action is just guilt. You acted. That's what matters." Lincoln ran to them, signing and speaking simultaneously. "Dad, Elizabeth, come play." They joined him by the fountain, no longer CEO and employee, no longer strangers bound by transaction, but family forged through truth. Visitors watched. A black woman, a white man, a brown child united by something deeper than blood. Someone whispered, "That's them. That's the family that changed everything." Elizabeth overheard, shook her head gently. "We didn't change everything. We just decided to listen." As the sun set, casting golden light across the memorial, the three of them sat together by Jamal's name. Lincoln practiced a new word. "Legacy. What does that mean?" Alex answered, "It means what you leave behind when you're gone." Lincoln considered this, then spoke with the wisdom of someone who'd learned the value of every word. "Then Jamal's legacy is me hearing, and my legacy will be making sure everyone can." Elizabeth squeezed his hand. "The world is listening now, baby. Finally listening." The fountain's water caught the fading light, and in its ripples appeared reflections of all 20 children, not forgotten, not silenced, but transformed into purpose that would outlive them all. Elizabeth's voice, soft but certain. "They say money talks, but I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing wealth can do is shut up and listen." Lincoln didn't need to hear to have a voice. He needed someone willing to see beyond sound. In the end, the mysterious object I pulled from his ear wasn't just metal, it was truth. And truth, once freed, echoes forever. The three of them sat together as darkness fell, bound by loss and united by love, proving that the greatest legacy isn't what you build, it's what you're willing to tear down to make things right. And that's where Elizabeth, Alex, and Lincoln's story reaches its beautiful, heartbreaking conclusion. But their story doesn't have to end here. Your turn to act. First, subscribe if you haven't already, because stories that challenge power, expose truth, and celebrate courage need amplification. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone working in medicine, someone who's lost trust in corporations, someone fighting their own battle for truth. And finally, comment below and tell me, what's the one lesson from this story that will stay with you? Is it Elizabeth's courage, Alex's redemption, Lincoln's resilience, or Jamal's legacy?